Coming up here on the Metal Command podcast, Jon Schaffer of Iced Earth gets a full pardon for his role at the January 6th protests. Starr has a new song out and a new album coming out this summer. I review the latest album by the band Labyrinth. And today we remember John Sykes, and I give you my top 5 albums that John Sykes played on. John, of course, sadly passed away of cancer recently at the age of 65, and I will be talking about that as well on this program. All of that next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you today on January 30th, 2025. I'm really excited to be here with everybody and have a lot to talk about here in today's episode. And again, if you do like what you see and hear on this podcast, by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you are following this show on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a like and a follow there. Have a lot to talk about, and going to be reviewing the new Labyrinth album, In the Vanishing Echoes of Goodbye, which I think is an outstanding album. And for those of you that do follow the show, you'll see that there is an interview with Olaf Thorson, the guitar player from one of the guitar players from Labyrinth. Labyrinth, of course, put out just an unbelievably awesome power metal album, and that interview is also up on the Facebook page and the YouTube channel as well. Going to talk a bit about the new Starr song called Rise Up, a very awesome, a really awesome track, actually. And Giles Lavery, who is also singing in Warlord, and he was singing a lot of the live dates for Alcatraz. Giles Lavery is a big reason why I also think that song is outstanding, along with Jack's great songwriting. And I will be talking about that in this episode. I'm going to talk about probably one of the more controversial figures in the heavy metal scene, and that would be Jon Schaffer of Iced Earth, who received a pardon when President Trump pardoned all of the January 6th protesters. But let's start it off with remembering John Sykes, who tragically and sadly passed away at the age of 65. He died from cancer, according to the reports out there. And John Sykes is one of those guitar players that, he didn't play on a ton of albums, but everything he played on was just phenomenal in a lot of these bands that he was in. So I'm going to talk about more of his impact and how people, essentially really view him. A lot of guitar players really love this guy. He really had a tremendous influence on a lot of people. And I fully believe that this guy is actually one of the most influential guitar players that I've ever heard. And if you ask a lot of people that play guitar, many of them were actually influenced by the stuff that he played. So I'm going to really quickly go over my top 5 albums that John Sykes played on. And I'm going to talk about those records. Let's start with number 5, Tigers of Pantang, and the album Crazy Nights. That'll be number 5 on my countdown of the top 5 albums. And this is a good album. This is one that really does get overlooked because so many people love the Spellbound album, which I do think is better than Crazy Nights, and it is on this list. But Crazy Nights is a really great record. And it is the 3rd Tigers of Pantang album, and it was the 2nd full-length album that John played on. Now, there is an album that came out after this where he played on a couple of tracks, but Crazy Nights is essentially the last full-length album that John played on with Tigers of Pantang before he joined Thin Lizzy. So this record is very good, highly underrated, highly overlooked, but there is definitely a lot of great stuff on this album. Album number 4, the self-titled Blue Murder album. John sings on this. This was a record produced by Bob Rock, and he had a lot of really, a lot of support from the record company, it felt like, going back and looking back on this album. But for whatever reason, it never caught on. This was one of those records that was great, received a lot of great reviews, but it really was not an album that really ended up going mainstream. It has a cult following, And for good reason. I mean, it's a brilliant record. It just, for whatever reason, the mainstream audience didn't really catch on to it, and it didn't sell a ton of copies. But the people that do like the album absolutely love it. And I would consider this an outstanding record. And John Sykes and his playing, and even his singing, because I think he's actually a pretty good singer, were brilliant on this record. Carmen Appice plays the drums on it. He does a brilliant job, and a criminally highly underrated and sometimes forgotten album. Album number 3 on the countdown of my top 5 albums John Sykes played on is Spellbound by Tigers of Pantang. Believe it or not, this is the first full-length album I ever heard him play on. Now, I definitely had heard the Whitesnake album, the 1987 album by Whitesnake, but I had only heard songs on the radio. I hadn't heard the actual full-length album itself. Now, with that being said, I remember getting a copy of Spellbound. I found it in a CD store, like a used CD store in the 90s when I was in high school. Totally blown away by that album, and I still, to this day, I still go back and listen to it quite often. But if you're looking to hear what John did in Tigers of Pantang, this is the album you want to buy first. And then also get Crazy Nights. You should get both of them, but Spellbound, if you're going to pick between the 2 albums he played on, Spellbound is the one you want to pick. Album number 2 on my top 5 albums John Sykes played on is it's the album Thunder and Lightning by Thin Lizzy, which contains probably my favorite guitar solo that Sykes ever played. And it's in basically the title track of the album, the first song in the album. Just an outstanding record. And, it's sad because he joined that band really, didn't have a long tenure there, obviously, because Phil Lynott is no longer with us and he passed away. But I can tell you that this record is one of the most outstanding albums I think I've ever heard from a guitar playing perspective. Is it my favorite Thin Lizzy album? Probably not, but it's definitely up there. And John's guitar playing and the solos he plays are just ridiculously awesome. If you ask a lot of guitar players, many of them would say that the solo in Thunder and Lightning is one of the hardest guitar solos John Sykes ever did, one of the hardest guitar solos to play. So that would be number 2 on my list. And number 1 on the list, and this should not surprise anybody, is the self-titled Whitesnake album, or as some people call it, the Whitesnake 1987 album. John played all the guitars on this. Hands down, probably one of the most influential albums ever. A lot of guitar players that love John's playing think that this is the best work he ever did. I would agree with that. And I mean, here's the thing. David Coverdale has always brought in very, very extremely talented people when it comes to the lineups he's brought into Whitesnake. And that is from the start of Whitesnake all the way until the present. I mean, there's so many great guitar players this man has had in his band over the years. The old Bernie Marsden, Mickey Moody duo I thought was great. Obviously, you had Sykes in the band. Reb Beach was in the band. Doug Aldrich, Steve Vai, Adrian Vandenberg. I mean, you can go through a whole lineup of not just guitar players, but musicians that Coverdale has had in Whitesnake. And I think it's important to talk about that and recognize that because for me, and I recognize that all these guys are talented, John Sykes is the best guitar player I think David Coverdale ever had. And the 1987 Whitesnake album, I believe, is still the biggest selling album they have ever had. And it's just brilliant from start to finish. When they came out with the box set for this record, I got excited. I went out and bought it, and that was probably a few years back. But definitely one of the most brilliant albums ever recorded. And John's solos on songs like Still of the Night and Crying in the Rain. I mean, everything he played on that record turned to gold. So those are my top 5 John Sykes albums. I'm curious as to what all of you think. What are your favorite albums by John? What are your favorite songs that he played on? What's your favorite album that he played on? I'd love to hear, or I'd love to see what you all have to say, and leave a comment and let me know what your favorite John Sykes album is. So sad to see him gone, but the man definitely left his mark on the music world. Let's talk about Jack Starr and the new song that he has out called Rise Up. It's off of the upcoming album Out of the Darkness Part 2, which I believe comes out during the summer. So this song came out a little while back. They've been signed to the Brave Words label, which I think is really cool. Shocked that the guys at Brave Words, who have been around a long time, have not done a record label, or at least hadn't started a record label till recently. I'm actually shocked this hadn't happened earlier. You know, brand name print magazine. It's been around for a long time, been around for decades. They finally started a record label, and they got some really good bands on that label. I mean, they ended up putting out Paul Di'Anno's last solo album. They just signed my buddy George Call's band, Aska, which, you know, definitely well-deserved. And, of course, Jack Starr, who I think is an incredible guitar player and a great songwriter. The style of the music is really not out of the ordinary for Jack and his songwriting. It has a very anthemic style of song. I consider Jack Starr and his band to be like, you know, the gold standard for American power metal. You know, meaning that, you know, bands like him, you know, Jagpanzer, you know, like old school American power metal. If you're looking for like the gold standard for that, it is Jack's songwriting. It is his guitar playing. And he brought Giles Lavery in, which to me is an improvement. Now, why is it an improvement? Do I like his voice better than, you know, the other singers Jack has had in a band? You know, I like his voice quite a bit, actually. It's not really as much that as it is Giles and his influence on the music. So while I consider Jack and his songwriting and his guitar playing to be like the gold standard of American styled power metal, I consider Giles Lavery as having pretty much the perfect voice for that style of music. And not only does he have really the perfect voice for that, but he also has a really great vision for how that style of metal is supposed to sound. You know, when I hear Giles singing Warlord and I hear him in some of the other stuff that he's done, the one thing and the one talent that he has is the fact that he really sings great vocal melodies, and he really adds a lot more than a lot of singers probably would or probably do to that style of music. It's just his way, his approach to a lot of those songs. Not only does his voice suit that style of music really well, but his whole vision of what that music should sound like from the vocalist perspective, I think is one of the best, if not the best right now of anybody out there. It's just the way that and then you take that and you mix that with Jack and his songwriting style. It doesn't really get any better than that. I've had a little bit of a preview of the record. I can tell you, this is going to be an amazing album when it comes out. I think it's going to be a lot better, in my opinion, than the last Jack Starr album. And I think Giles and Jack together, I hope this duo and this combination doesn't stop. Because it's all about the vocal melodies and the hooks and how catchy these songs are. And I got to be honest, you know, while Jack has always done a tremendous job at that, I think Giles really added a lot to it, and I think the combination of both of them is absolutely brilliant. So if you haven't checked that out, I'm going to put that in the show notes, a link to that song. But I'm really excited for this album, and I'm really excited to get Giles on the show yet again at some point. I would love to have Jack Starr on the show again at some point, because he was a phenomenal interview to have him on the show, and he's definitely one of the more criminally underrated guitar players that has been a part of this scene for over 40 years, for that matter, going all the way back to the days he played in Virgin Steel. So really excited for that album, actually, folks, and I really think that it's going to be a monster power metal album. The other thing I do want to add in there, I'm really excited to see the folks at Brave Words really getting their record label going and signing bands that really fit in with that label. Because, again, you have a lot of great journalists at that magazine. You have a lot of really cool people at that magazine. I have nothing but good things to say about Tim Henderson. I remember when they were doing the Brave Words of Bloody Knuckles 6-pack stuff here in Cleveland, and those shows were awesome. Tim was an awesome guy. He came on my radio show once or twice back in the day, and just a really cool dude that lives and breathes this kind of music. And he always has. And I used to love, back in the day when the magazine was in print, I used to go to my local HMV and I used to pick up a copy of it. And then I believe I subscribed to it, which it was pretty pricey because it did come from Canada. But the magazine was always well done. And as somebody who later on started writing for magazines, not metal magazines, but I wrote for a couple classic car magazines, and I did photography for a couple of those magazines as well. I really appreciated just the quality of the publication Brave Words really did put out when it was an actual print magazine, because they did a tremendous job at it. I used to always love the Brave Words samplers too. Those were really cool. For those of you that remember those, I think I still have a lot of those. And fun fact, I will let everybody know this fun fact right now. The first ever article that I ever wrote that ended up getting published was a short article in an issue of Brave Words, I believe back in 1999. I had written it about Michael Kiske, who obviously was not in Halloween at the time, but I was talking about his solo career and a lot of the struggles he was having with it, and some of the pitfalls and the obstacles he was facing in doing a completely different style of music than Halloween. But it was a really cool article. Tim ended up publishing it. But well before I became an actual real writer, Brave Words published my first ever article. I think it was half a page or a full page. I don't remember how long it was, but it wasn't very long. But that is where my interest in writing and creative writing actually started. So I figured I'd throw that out there. So anyhow, check out this song, Rise Up. It is off of, again, the upcoming new Jack Starr album. I'm going to link it in the show notes here on YouTube. Going to go into the break. Coming up after the break, going to come out, we're going to talk a bit about Jon Schaffer, who was recently pardoned by President Trump. And I am also going to review the newest Labyrinth album, which I'm really excited for. But in the Vanishing Echoes of Goodbye by Labyrinth, I'll put some links to that album in the show notes as well. So I will be right back here on the Metal Command podcast after this. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support. Welcome back to the Metal Command podcast, everybody. Tony here with you. And now it's time to talk about probably one of the more hot button subjects going on in the heavy metal scene. And of course, a person that has been surrounded by some controversy over the last 4 years, and that would be Jon Schaffer from Iced Earth. So this is something I haven't talked much about. And personally, when it comes to this show, I really don't bring politics into the show too often. Now, if I interview somebody, obviously, if they talk about political stuff, I'm going to leave it in there. But generally speaking, I myself do not come on an episode like this and start talking about politics. The reason I do not talk about politics is the fact that I follow politics very closely, and there is a lot of negativity that goes on in the political landscape. And so my escape to get away from that is to host this show and really not talk politics. And what actually clears my mind when I study this kind of stuff is actually listening to music. Everybody has their own thing to clear their mind. Music is what does it for me. So normally I don't bring this kind of stuff up, but unfortunately I have to bring it into the show if I'm going to talk about Jon, because politics are pretty much at the center of what he did and his situation. I'm also going to be having a discussion on this show in regards to Jon Schaffer and his specific situation. I have a couple of very trusted people that not only know the music business really well, who are both guitar players, who both have had success in the music industry and the music business, have also worked in other capacities when it comes to music, such as production, managing some pretty significant bands, doing road work, logo work, you name it. I have two people that I trust quite a bit, where we can have a civilized discussion in regards to Jon and his situation. And that discussion will be coming up soon. And I will leave it at that. And this is sort of a preview to that. So I've refrained from talking about this for about 4 years. Initially, when Jon was seen at the January 6th protest, and obviously we saw photo and video of him inside of the Capitol building, I did post about it. But I really haven't talked much about him since then. I put up a link about him getting out of jail a while back, and then I posted about his pardon. President Trump obviously pardoned the 1,500 or 1,600 people that were either charged with a crime, had already or received a sentence, or they were at trial, whatever the case may be. All of those individuals were pardoned, and Jon obviously is one of them. And I didn't want to comment on his situation because he had yet to put a statement out. He did put a statement out back in October. I did share that statement on the Facebook page, but I really didn't comment too much on it. So now I'm going to comment on it a little bit and give you a preview of the discussion that I'm going to have on this show with two other people in regards to his situation. Now, in that discussion, let me also state that we are going to talk about him a little bit as a musician. We are going to talk about what happened with him and, talk about the jail time that he served and what actually happened with him. We are going to talk about the consequences of it. And then we are going to talk about whether the man can have a normal musical career and what that might look like. So that is what that discussion will entail. Now, I did not talk about this guy for 4 years because he can't really defend himself, and he really couldn't really put out a public statement. So I didn't want to scrutinize him or say anything about him until that statement came out. Over the last, and let me preface this by saying, I don't know Jon personally. I'm not friends with him. He was really cool. I never had a bad experience with him. There are people that really dislike this guy. I don't dislike him. I met him back in the day when Something Wicked came out. I hung out with him at a few shows here in the Cleveland area. Super incredibly nice guy to me at that time. He gave me a long sleeve Night of the Storm Rider shirt. And he also gave me a double CD of Days of Purgatory. They played in some real small dump of a club, like 45 minutes outside of Cleveland, with Jag Panzer and Anvil. It's a place called the Flying Machine. Not many people showed up, but I sat down, did an interview with Jon for the radio show, and he's told me he appreciated my support, and he gave me those two items, which I actually still have. But over the years, he's come on my radio show, and he always seemed like a very honest, very direct, upfront guy, and said what he thought, and really didn't try to kiss anybody's ass. I mean, that is the vibe I ended up getting from him. And most people that I know who know him will pretty much say the same thing. They say he's very direct. You know where you stand with him. And I do have a certain level of respect for people who are like that. But I am not friends with him, and I do not know him on a personal level. With that being said, over the last 4 years, I have watched people in the metal media just take shots at him and drag his name through the mud and excoriate this guy every chance they get. Like every update they had on this guy's status, when he was getting sentenced, or what his plea deal was about, or how long when he got out of jail, or whatever update you had. I mean, practically almost every metal media outlet was taking shots at this guy. And to me, that's not very fair because we haven't really heard a statement from him until October. And I've reread that statement again and wanted to really get my thoughts on it of what I think about his situation and what he did. So now looking at the statement, I feel like I can comment on it now. And when he was making the statement, the two things that stood out to me were the two things I was hoping he would say. The first part of the statement, he talked about making a very bad impulsive decision. I agree with that. He made a very poor decision, a very poor emotionally charged decision, and let his emotions get the best of him. You know, that's something that I think pretty much everybody can agree on that. The man let his emotions get the best of him. And he made a very poor decision. And there were consequences. And when I initially posted about it, I said this. He had pretty bad consequences. He acknowledged he screwed up in his statement, and he did acknowledge the consequences of his actions. There were bad consequences to his actions, you know, for his family, to his band members and people he was creating music with. Probably had a lot of business partners that probably had a lot to do with merchandising the band, you know, making the hot sauce, the coffee that he was coming out with, the Black Flag coffee that he was advertising right before this whole incident happened. Just anybody associated with him had to deal with the shrapnel from his decision to protest. And he acknowledged both of those things. Now, you have three categories of people when it comes to John. And when I posted about him recently, you know, people, the thinking a lot of people have now compared to back in 2020, because time has passed, I'm going to give you three major categories of people. First category are the people that think he did nothing wrong. He should have served no jail time. He was just expressing his right to protest, and that nothing should have ever happened to him. And anybody that disassociated themselves with John is a backstabber. You have another fringe category of people who think John is a terrorist. They think he's a traitor. They think he should have been figuratively burned at the stake and thrown in prison the rest of his life, and he should never be allowed to have a career or make any money ever again, and everything bad that can happen to a person should happen to him. And then you have a clear majority of the people who recognize that John made a mistake. They don't care about what happened anymore. They feel he served his time, and they feel he deserves a second chance. And the category that I pretty much fall into is that exact category. I believe he deserves a second chance. I believe that he made a mistake, and I believe he dealt with more than enough consequences for what he did. Now, I'm going to dive deeper in that in the discussion we are going to have, but the man deserves a second chance. I want to see another Iced Earth album. The thing that upset me about what he did was not that he went down to the protest. His political views, I don't have an issue with most of his political views either, because there is some truth to some of the things he's talked about in the past. But the one thing nobody really talks about is how bad of a position he put his band members, colleagues, business partners, and his family. Now, I'm specifically going to talk about his band members. It was a lose-lose situation for them. The reason being is that when this first happened, everybody you could possibly imagine that you could think of, people were going on the pages for his band members or former band members and completely going crazy in the comments. I mean, the stuff that I saw on the Blind Guardian page was absolutely egregious, and it was disgusting. The things that people were saying to Hansi, they were calling him people were saying Hansi must be a Nazi. You know, people were saying that Hansi's is a right winger, and that if he doesn't quit, he's automatically, he's automatically a terrorist like John is. I mean, there was some stuff on that page that for me was absolutely ridiculous. But the thing is, it's a lose-lose situation, because if people do not disassociate themselves with John, which eventually all those people, quit the bands, quit Iced Earth. Obviously, Hansi said, yeah, I'm done with Demons and Wizards. If they don't do that, that whole cancel culture mob, left-wing mob, goes after them. If they quit the bands and kind of disassociate themselves with him, then all of John's supporters are going to go after them and call them a backstabber, call them traitors, and all this stuff, and say that these people sold out and they abandoned John and they don't truly support him. So realistically, these band members are screwed either way. I mean, there's nothing. The thing is, there's nothing these people could do to win in that situation, and that is one of the positions these people were put in as a result of his actions. And that's something I have a problem with, because when you act impulsively and you let your emotions get the best of you, you may not be the only one that has to deal with the consequences of your actions, in all seriousness. And he acknowledges that in his statement. Now, people have asked me a couple questions. I get emails from people or messages. The first one is, I had a lot of people asking me, do I think his statement is sincere? It was a statement put out by his, through his lawyers. I believe the statement to be sincere. I believe he sincerely regrets what he did. In that statement, he acknowledges the people that were adversely affected by what he did. And the other thing that he does is he takes personal responsibility for allowing his emotions to get the best of him. And he acknowledges that he should have never went down there, and he should definitely not have. And in the discussion I'm going to have about him, I'm going to talk more in depth as to why. The other thing people ask me is, would I ever interview him on this show knowing what he did? And the answer is yes. I would definitely bring that man on this show. If he had an album that came out, or if I was contacted and he said, hey, I want to come on and tell my story, I would totally let him do that. And for those of you that know me really well, you all know when I do I don't do interviews. I have conversations with people. I don't really I don't ask loaded questions to people like some of these media pundits do on mainstream media. I don't ask loaded questions. I want people to tell their story. I want them to freely express themselves in whatever way they want to tell their story. Doesn't matter what it's about, their album, some crazy tour story, something controversial they've been involved in, whatever. I'm a pretty fair person. I don't really go and ask loaded questions to try to bait them or corner them or to make them look bad. Because ultimately, you want the interviews, or the conversations as I call them, to be as honest as possible. So yes, I would let him on. I'd let him come on the show and tell his story. No problems. Because I think it's only fair to him. Because I can tell you right now, he starts going on some of these other larger media outlets, or some of these other media outlets that have been bashing him for the last 4 years. They're not going to do that. They're going to ask him loaded questions. They're going to try to make him look as bad as possible. Not all of them, but a lot of these people will do that. And I don't think that's fair to him. So that is something that I definitely would do. And a few people had asked me that question as well, as it pertains to John Schaffer himself. So again, do I think he was stupid and made a terrible mistake? Absolutely. He let his emotions get the best of him, and he really did put his bandmates and his associates and family in a very difficult, almost unwinnable position as a result of what happened. Do I think he's a bad guy? My experiences with him, no. But again, I don't know him on a personal level. But I'm leaning towards no as to whether I think the dude is a bad guy or a terrible person or whatnot. And the other thing he talks about in this statement is self-reflection. I think that is something that people like him, being as busy as they usually are, they don't get a chance to sit back and self-reflect on stuff. Like for me, I have time to do that. I'll go and watch myself on the podcast. I'll listen to it. I'll watch other podcasts. I'll study what other people do to see what I could do better. But a lot of guys, like a musician like John, a lot of those guys do not get a lot of that time to self-reflect on anything because they are constantly involved with something, whether it's touring, whether it's promoting a product, writing and recording an album. I mean, musicians, believe it or not, if they're doing it as a full-time gig, they are extremely busy. So I like that aspect about his statement. And I'll end it off with this. Because when you ask me if I think the guy was sincere in being remorseful for what he did, all you got to do is look at the quote the judge gave to him. Because the judge complimented him on the fact that he held himself accountable, turned himself in, and the judge felt that John was truly remorseful for what he does. Now, judges see lots of despicable people all the time. And if the judge is going to give you that kind of compliment and statement, that's just another thing that makes me believe his statement is sincere, that he meant what he said, and that he's truly remorseful and regrets what happened. So on that note, I'll leave it right there. Curious also, folks, what you think about his situation. Do any of you want to see Iced Earth come back? He's obviously going to be recording music. Do you guys never want to buy another Iced Earth album again? Or are you somebody that really supports John and no matter what, and you don't do anything, and you don't think he did anything wrong? Leave that in the comments because I'm curious as to what a lot of you have to say. Now let's go to a more positive thing going on, and that is the new Labyrinth album. In the Vanishing Echoes of Goodbye came out back on January 17th, 2025. Really excited for this record. I was really blown away by this album as well. So I have followed Labyrinth for about 26, 27 years. I remember the debut album, which really didn't have the greatest production on it, but Fabio Leone sang on the debut. But then they had an album come out called Return to Heaven Denied. And it's still to this day one of the most incredible speed metal, melodic metal, power metal albums that I've ever heard. And then shortly after, Metal Blade put out the Timeless Crime EP. Again, this was kind of the infancy of speed metal and melodic metal sort of making a comeback. So I really loved those two releases. Then the Sons of Thunder album came out, and there's a big controversy over that. I'll talk about that here in a second. But realistically, this band has been kind of hit or miss for me over the years. Now, Olaf had left and formed a band called Vision Divine, which I think is an excellent band. And what he's done with Vision Divine is awesome. And then he ended up coming back to Labyrinth, which really made me happy because here's the thing about Olaf. Olaf Thorson has a much different style of playing than the other guys in Labyrinth do. He's got a different set, a really different set of influences, I think. And when you listen to them, and you really listen to, because the music has a little bit of a darker edge to it. It's not like a happy European metal sounding, power metal band. I mean, they definitely have a more epic, more darker vibe to their music than, say, a lot of the other European bands do. But he was influenced by a lot of thrash bands. And you could hear that in his playing on these records. And that combination with the more melodic approach, I think, is great. And here's Olaf talking about his favorite thrash bands. One of them being the band Toxic, which I actually absolutely love. Check out this interview clip where he talks about his influences. Check it out.
But all those bands who fought me as a musician, as a guitarist, were coming from the United States. I was in love with most American bands like Mordred, Anthrax. You mentioned whatever you want from America back then, and I was studying and practicing over those bands. Of course, at the same time, I didn't want to copy them, And I underline, of course, I'm not American, so my influences, my history, my culture is Italian, hence European. But I was really finding so weird that we have been pushed into the European power metal, which it may even be right, but you understand my point of view. I always struggled with this because it sounded like it wasn't completely fitting the band.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that there are bands in when you talk about American power metal, you always have a little bit of a much darker sound to the music, as opposed to in Europe, it's a little bit not lighter, but not as dark. Probably a little happier.
Yeah.
And
we were calling the European power metal in the early days happy metal.
Yeah, right. And I don't feel Labyrinth is happy metal. I would say that they are a little bit more of a darker thing. Yeah. So so you're big on thrash metal. So did you grow up on like the Bay Area scene, like Exodus or Testament?
Absolutely. Yeah. All the bands you mentioned, I know every album from them. One of my all-time favorite bands, Mordred, Forbidden. So I'm in love with that kind of music, that style. The Bay Area has been a big influence to me as a guitarist. My favorite band, my favorite guitarist is a band, I guess you know them, are Toxic.
Okay, yeah.
So Think the album was released, it blew my mind off completely. All my style, what you can hear without the album from Toxic, I wouldn't play the things you can hear and listen to on Return to Heaven Denied.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've had Josh, the guitar player, on my show.
Josh Christian and Gross is my god, my guitar god.
Yeah, and they had a new album come out, and that album was phenomenal. Yeah, that dude is. Yeah. I mean, he's actually a really nice guy, and that dude really. I mean, he has such a unique playing style for thrash metal that, if I hear him play, I can tell it's him because he doesn't sound like anybody. Not even in heavy metal, but even in thrash metal in general. And it's interesting you mention that because those first two Toxic albums are so ahead of their time.
Yeah. They were coming from another dimension. Imagine back then. I mean, it was such a new music. It was thrash, but there was much more than thrash. The voice, especially in Think This, was so melodic. And they even added a ballad. There's Still Defense was the song, and it was not belonging to a thrash album. So I was a teenager, and I was saying, "What's going on? There's something going on here. There's something new coming," and that's when I got these influences, and I say, I don't want to be put into a single style and play the same song forever and ever.
Yeah, no, and again, that's cool, man, because not many people mention some of the lesser known thrash bands that were really good. So, because they came out with an album, Dismorta, not long ago, Toxic did, and that album was like, it was insane how good that record was.
Yeah, absolutely. You said the right word, insane. Great album.
And that's the best, and that's the best way to describe his songwriting because it's so different from everybody. That's the best way to describe it for me, and insane in a good way, And so, it's interesting you say that because when I do listen to a lot of these songs that you've put out, and even stuff that you've done over the years, I do hear in your guitar playing, especially your rhythm playing, I hear a little bit of thrash metal in that. But because
absolutely,
but because you have, you're writing different kinds of songs, but those elements exist. I think it's cool that you mentioned that band. Definitely.
Of course. I don't want to copy anyone. But my roots come from there. Definitely.
Oh. And that is Olaf talking about his favorite bands. The guy grew up on thrash metal and loves a lot of these thrash metal bands. Mordred is a band I haven't heard in a long time, but he talks about Toxic. And it's interesting because I think that Toxic is just a ridiculously, criminally underrated band. I mean, they are just an absolutely monster band. And Josh Christian, he's a really cool dude. I have an interview with him on this program. The last album, Toxic, put out This Morta, was phenomenal. Then you have Think This, World Circus. I mean, these albums, when those came out, were really ahead of their time. Nobody was playing anything like that. And even to this day, with thrash metal being around as long as it has, nobody plays anything like them. So Olaf definitely referenced them as a big influence. And you can hear a little bit of that in his music, because when you listen to Labyrinth, there's a lot of twists and turns in some of those songs that you really don't expect on this album. So if I'm comparing this album to their past works, I think it is, most people, when they listen to Labyrinth, most people think Return to Heaven Denied is like the album. And this new Labyrinth album, I think, is just as good, maybe even better. I think it rivals Return to Heaven Denied. A lot of people still go back to that album, but I got to be honest, In the Vanishing Echoes of Goodbye is a tremendous release. And, I'm really happy, and they've been slowly coming. I mean, the last Labyrinth album I thought was very good as well. I think I gave it an 8 out of 10. This one is a drastic improvement for me. It is a 10 out of 10. The album is simply that good. There's a lot of great melodies in it. It's definitely much heavier, has a little more speed metal as far as the speed metal elements to it, more than the last few albums. But generally speaking, it is an awesome record. And it's one that is a definite Album of the Year candidate. And with that being said, I don't know what it is, but I'm getting so many great records to start off this year. This album's a 10 out of 10. It really is that good. So that is my review for it. Now, for those of you that have followed the band and want to revisit something that happened in the band's past, the follow-up to Return to Heaven Denied, which was a very highly anticipated album called Sons of Thunder, you had a controversy over it because the mix didn't sound great. There was a lot of stuff missing from the album that should have been on it. It was released when, it probably shouldn't have been. But I did ask Olaf to go into that story and talk about it in great detail. And I want you guys, before I end this podcast off, I want you all to check out this interview clip where we do talk about that. Check this out. The craziness surrounding the Sons of Thunder album when that came out.
Yeah.
I remember it came out, and then it was kind of like there was a bad mix on it, and then it ended up getting remixed. And maybe talk a bit about that, because I thought that record with the songs that were on it were great progression from what Return to Heaven Denied, what the kind of music you wrote on that. And then there was this huge, controversy, fight, or whatever the case maybe was going on with that record at the time. I remember getting the Japanese version of it, and it was a little bit different than and stuff. So let's talk about that, because that's an interesting story.
Yeah, sure. No, there's no big secret behind it, and there's no problem with talking about it. First of all, it's been everything and the contrary of everything has been said about that album. Mm-hmm. And since this negative atmosphere going around it, after 20 years, we perceive it as an album which did really bad. Let me tell you, it didn't at all. Sales-wise, Return to Heaven Denied sold much less than Sons of Thunder. So the album went in the charts, and it sold really good. So the reason why we're talking this way about it is that, as you can hear when you listen to it, things were not going good. Why? What happened? Well, it's long story short. Our label, after the success of Return to Heaven Denied, of course, wanted to push things to a higher level. And the first move was to hire a producer, namely Neil Cannon. Okay. Nick Cannon is a great producer. He just realized some very good albums. The last one I remember before us was producing Nevermore. Yeah. So it looked like being the right guy for the band. And anyway, we were still young and not so experienced to say no or to try something different. I remember our personal choice was Wagner, the producer from Megadeth,
Okay.
but it didn't. It wasn't possible. It was too busy at the time. So we say, okay, let's go with Neil Cannon. Why not? I mean, Nevermore are a great band, and they were sounding actually great. So
yeah,
let's do this.
and the thing is too, he's produced a lot of different, really, been involved with great bands, pop bands, metal bands.
Spiral Architecture,
Yeah,
many complicated bands. So there was no
yeah,
reason to say it wouldn't be right. What we realized during the recordings, it was completely, how can I say, it was not connected with the music we wanted to realize. Our music was, when he was commenting during the pre-production, he said our music was too complicated in a funny way. Not that we play like architects, spiral architecture or spastic Inc., but he was saying our music was unnecessarily complicated for the style.
mm-hmm.
And he wanted to cut things, and he wanted to make everything sounds in more straight. I don't know how to explain this. Anyway, there was some disagreement with this, but again, we were too young, so we said, okay, you do whatever you want. And the next step during the recordings, an example, was to cut all the solos off. Almost most of the solos were cut. He didn't want the album to have many solos because he said that the solos don't belong to this kind of music.
Yeah.
And so on and so on. The atmosphere in the studio was really, really bad, really bad.
Okay.
The best player has been sent home right after a few minutes starting the recording. He didn't like the style, so we had to call a sessionist to complete the best parts. And then we went with the guitars. The keyboards were completely cut, and so on. Excuse me a second. And so on. Anyway, when the mix happened, he chose not to have the band around. So he took everything and he went, I think it was in Texas. He went to a studio in Texas to mix it alone. And he sent the master straight to the label, not even to us. We had no chance to listen to the master, to the mix. And it was not us, but it was the label who, back then, Metal Blade, from their base in Stuttgart, Germany. They flew to Milano. We have been called to Milano. We listened to the mix, and they were informing us the mix was horrible and totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
No guitar solos. I think like 2 or 3 guitar solos were left. Most of them were have been replaced with some weird synth, I don't know, whatever arrangement. The vocals have been reduced in terms of choirs, and it was sounding completely different from what you can hear now in the final master. So at that point, as a band, we expected the label to give us, I don't know, 1 month to redo things, but they actually gave us 1 week to remix it.
Right.
And we had no producer anymore. So the only thing we could do was to hire the same studio guy who did the recordings, and he had to remix the whole album in less than 1 week. Remixing also meant to re-record guitar solos and some other stuff which were missing because what he didn't add to the master was erased. We had nothing left. So I remember myself recording solos at 3 a.m. in the morning, like Rage of Kings. The song, The Rage of the King, it's me playing a solo at 3 a.m. in a studio with some random amplifier because the stuff was not there anymore.
Right.
And this was the recipe, to a big disaster, of course, in terms of sound-wise, production-wise.
Correct.
but we had no more control on that. I mean, the label came, took the master, they listened to the final version, they said, okay, that sounds good enough, let's go. And they released it because they already had pre-sales, and they wanted to keep it hot, and they wanted to put it out and sell it. So that's how it went.
Sure. Did that, that whole crazy situation, was that part of the reason you left the band to begin with? Like, I know you were out of the band for quite a while. And
Definitely. Yeah. I totally disagree. I would never let that album be released that way. What I say, it's strengthened. It's stronger now than back then, of course. But what I was saying back then, I know how to produce an album.
Mm-hmm.
Which I did. Now in these days, I'm still producing my own music, and that's the moment when I have learned I am going to produce my own music. But back then, I was a young guitarist, and I was really pissed off because I said I am not willing to have this album released the way it sounds, because the songs are there. Just give it a new sound. Just if needed, let's redo it. No problem. I can do it in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks. Let's redo this and give it the proper production it deserves. I didn't find any support, even from the other guys, but I don't think they're guilty for this. We were too young.
Yeah.
And when business pushes you and everyone around says, you can't delay the release. Let's put it out. I understand now that some other guys agreed with this plan, and I say, okay, I call myself out because I was losing the control over my music, and it's the worst thing it may happen to you as a musician, I think.
Sure. Yeah. So you basically proceeded then with Vision Divine for a long time, and put out some great records. I mean, I remember you had a second album, then Streams of Consciousness was probably, it's actually still one of my favorite records you've ever done.
Yeah.
That just had, obviously Vision Divine's a bit different from Labyrinth in how a lot of those records sound, which, people would say that's power metal, but I would tell people that it's a different sounding band and in many ways, but yeah, you did that for a while. And that is Olaf Thorson talking about the situation surrounding the Sons of Thunder album, which the songs were good, but it was crazy when they first released that, how terrible it sounded. So with that being said, favorite songs, honestly, my favorite song in the album is the last song, Inhuman Race, Welcome Twilight, Accept the Changes, Out of Place, The Healing. These are all really incredible tracks, among some of the best Labyrinth songs and the best songs that Olaf and company have ever created. So I absolutely dig this record. And it's so hard. There's so many good albums that have come out. But right now, 2025 is off to a great start. The new Gravedigger is good. Really digging the re-recorded version of Balls to the Wall that Udo and company are doing. Looking to get him on the show. And that's pretty much where I'm at this point. Coming up on the show, I'm going to have a lot of great stuff coming on. Stu Marshall, the guy that recorded this album. I recorded this album with, at least I did a song with him on the Empires of Eden album. He's going to be coming on to talk about this record specifically, talk about his other band, Night Legion, and obviously what's going on with Death Dealer, because we haven't had a lot of updates from them. I have Thunder Mother interview. That's coming up very soon. I'm going to also review their upcoming album, which I think is outstanding. And I have a lot of really great stuff planned. I have the discussion about Jon Schaffer, which is going to be coming up. I'm going to try to get Giles Lavery on this show to talk about the upcoming Jack Starr album and what, the Brave Words label itself. And I just have a lot of people coming on this show, and I'm really, really excited for 2025. So with that being said, I thank you all for your support. I thank you for watching. If you like what you see and hear on this podcast, by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And I appreciate you watching. Stay metal. Thank you for watching and listening to the Metal Command podcast. If you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And of course, if you are following me on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a like and a follow there. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.